evening. I'm so happy to see a full crowd here. I don't know who has the bigger fan base, Tom or Atticus. But it's hard to find a room to contain all the fans. I'm Allison Cox, your host for the evening on behalf of the Friends of the Marlborough Public Library. Thank you, Ray Johnson, the president. I know I'm not who you're here to see, but while I have the mic for just a few moments, I'm just going to make a couple of announcements before I introduce our honored guests. Tonight's program featuring Tom, Ryan, and Atticus is the first in the 2012 McConnell Author Celebrity Series and would not be possible save for the tireless efforts of the Friends of the Library, who work all year to raise funds and organize programs for our enjoyment and cultural edification. So thank you, friends, for all that you do and for welcoming me to be a part of this team. Thank you. I also want to say thank you to the funds that we receive from the Ezra Cutting Trust and the Marlborough Cultural Council, and to the Metro West Daily News and Marlborough Enterprise for their media sponsorship, and to WMCT-TV for recording this event so we can share it with the entire community. If you'd like to join the Friends, as Tom pointed out, and hear about all of these programs that are coming up, and if you want to be amongst the first to know, then please fill out a membership card before you leave this evening. Guests coming up for this series, I just want to give you a little heads up on that. Let's see, best-selling rock and roll biographer Stephen Davis, whose latest book, More Room in a Broken Heart, The True Adventures of Carly Simon, will be here in March. Saloma Furlong, author of Why I Left the Amish, will be here in April. And Boston Globe political staff writer and co-author of The Real Romney, Scott Hellman, stops by in May, just in time for the upcoming election, to find out what he has to say. Tonight, Tom is going to speak for 45 minutes or so, and then we'll open up the floor for questions, and at the conclusion, there will be time for autographing of the books, as Tom says. So make sure you stick around for that if you have books that you'd like to have autographed, and they are for sale in the back, of course. So it was only a little more than a month ago that I was approached by the Friends to put together this program. So I had to work quick and find some authors quickly and make some contacts. And I must admit here that I was actually searching for a different author on HarperCollins' website when it's true. But I stumbled across this book.
We didn't pass yet.
But I stumbled across this book, and I don't know what made me pick it up at first, because cover his ears or something. I'm not normally a dog person, so at first, look at the.
He doesn't usually like libraries because they don't allow him in, or librarians.
But wait, let me finish. Okay. Let me finish. But there was this sweet little face staring up at me from the cover, and those snow boots, right, which I now know are called mucklucks. That's right. But yes, but those snow boots, Atticus, you drew me in. You won me over. I had to, yeah. So this is what happened. So it was, I just discovered this book and decided, well, maybe I should give that a try. And that very same weekend, I found out that my family was going to have to make an emergency trip to New Hampshire, to Vermont, actually, northern Vermont, to visit some family. And so, of course, we had to make the most important stop of all before we fled out of town. We had to stop at the library for the most important supplies of all, right? All of our reading materials. Well, miracle of miracles, there's a copy of Following Atticus on the shelf, which we all know is very hard to find now. So I grabbed a copy, brought it with us, and guess where I was sitting when I first opened the book? We had stopped in a hotel in New Hampshire to let the kids swim in the middle of winter. And so there I was, sitting at the base of the White Mountains, and I opened this book, and right away, Tom is telling me about how the cops stole his garbage. And I said, I really like this guy. He was funny. And then I met Maxwell and the other supporting characters of Newburyport, and before you know it, I'm in tears. And then I'm reading the story about Atticus getting his snowsuit. Do you all know about that story? And the next thing you know, I'm laughing hysterically. And I said, this is the guy. This is the author that I have to get. So thank you to Megan at HarperCollins for putting up with me, because I think I hounded her for at least a week. Tom was away on vacation at the time, calling her and emailing her, please. And so I will be forever grateful to her and to you, Tom, for accepting our invitation.
Well, we wouldn't have if we knew the other stuff. What was the other book you were looking at?
It's a good thing he didn't meet me until tonight, right?
What was the other book?
I don't even remember now.
Yeah,
That's the truth. That is the truth. It's the
As long as you didn't say it was Rin Tin Tin from.
No, absolutely, that is absolutely the truth. So Following Atticus is the story of a dog, but it's so much more than that. It's the story of Tom and his personal growth, all the while embracing his inner child. It's the story of a family and healing. It's an adventure story and a heroic journey. It's a call to action and a reminder of humility. It's a picture of the many facets of spirituality. It sets a perfect example for love in the way that Tom cares for Atticus and Atticus for Tom. And in the end, there's a girl's best friend, the promise of romance. And at the center of it all, this little dog who can make anyone fall for him, even me. So there you go. So thank you, Tom, for sharing your story with us. And now, please, this evening, share with us whatever you will. Welcome, Tom Ryan and Atticus.
Before you leave,
Yes.
look what you did to him. He's never done that before. Now you have to get him out. No, he's.
I said
Now,
that.
she was nervous because this was her first event, but I think she's done a great job. Great. I'll try to get him out. Do you want a cookie? Come on. Let's go. Well, you would be too. All right. Come on up. Here we go. Thank you. All right. Well, thanks for coming. It's always nice to see a good turnout. My publicity team at HarperCollins and my editor and my agent all warned me there'll be several events where not many people will show up, even for the best authors. And we've been very fortunate to have a great turnouts almost everywhere we went, except for Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where we only had one person. But we sold 25 books because I kept bothering people. HarperCollins said, you just understand you might not have a huge turnout all the time. And they handled Marley and me, so they know what they were talking about. But I said the difference is Marley was dead. And no one comes out to see the author. They come out to see Atticus. Hey, sorry. Our journey started on, our publishing journey started on September 20th, up in North Conway, in the area we live in. And when I first stood in front of an audience, I didn't know what to say. And I was nervous as can be. And Laura Lucy had to pull me out of the back room to get me to go on stage. She was the MC of the night. But since then, I realized it's a lot like writing The Undertowed. When I came to Newburyport, I was actually socially awkward at times. If I chose to go someplace, I was fine with it. But if I found myself in a situation where I wasn't of my choosing, I had social anxiety and I'd actually shut down. But starting my newspaper and hearing all the secrets in a small town of all these people, I realized that everyone else was just as messed up as me, or more so. So looking at you tonight, I feel very comfortable. Thank you. Our story starts, as she said, in Newburyport, and I didn't want to start it there. I wanted to start with my story with Atticus. I had written a paper for 11 years that was somewhat dark. It was about a city that was in middle of gentrification, the old versus the new. We had our first female mayor. She was an outsider, and to make the Good Old Boy Network even more upset, she was a lesbian. And that was always funny in Newburyport because it was such a provincial community at the time, so isolated, that a lot of the old Greeks and Irish didn't really know what a lesbian was. And the two old ladies standing in the bank of the Newburyport Five and on the line at to go up to the teller, they were talking, these two old ladies and the Greek ladies, and they're saying, "Did you hear about the mayor?" And the other one said, "No." And she said, "She's Lebanese." Newburyport had a history of muckraking journalists before me. There was William Lloyd Garrison, who played a huge role in the Civil War, getting it started with his paper called the Liberator. And following, and to show you how Newburyport loved him so much for what he did, they put up a statue of him, but that was after they ran him out of town on a rail back in the 1800s. Luckily, he got his work done, and he inspired Abraham Lincoln and several other people to fight the right fight. Then there was Bossa Gillis, who was a mayor. He was like James Michael Curley. At one time in the 40s and 50s, he was as popular as James Michael Curley and Jimmy Walker. There were pictures of the three of them together oftentimes. And Bossy was famous for his paper called The Asbestos, because it was too hot to handle. We'll get to you. Bossy was claimed to fame. He was once elected while he was in jail. And so I came along, and I didn't realize I was following a long line of these muckrakers by naming names and starting to write things. I started writing for the local paper, Record, just a volunteer column, and the same thing with the weekly paper. And it was interesting, the response. I was given credit, even though it was my first writing experience ever. I just knew I wanted to make a difference. I wasn't quite ready for what a difference would make. I was told I swayed the election, so the woman got reelected, even though she was not favored at one point. Once I started writing about the history of her opponent, an old boy who had done all kinds of misdeeds, the newcomers started to see what he was capable of, and they reelected her. Within a year, I started my own paper, and I called it The Undertowed. If you know John Irving's The World According to Garp, John's in the audience tonight. No, he's not. In John Irving's The World According to Garp, his mother's always yelling to little Garp, look out for the undertow as he's running on the beach. And Garp thinks there's actually a giant toad underneath the surface that will pull you under if you're not paying attention to things. And that's what Newburyport was like. Newburyport has this beautiful veneer. That's what Newburyport was like in 1995. Nowadays, it's very gentrified. It's so pretty, but it's lost a lot of the characters, and it's lost a lot of the character of the old town. Back then, you really had a walking history where you could talk to people and find out what had happened there. And sometimes I wish I'd come along earlier, like in the 1980s, when they had a huge necrophilia ring from some of the city fathers. Or the American Nazi Party coming to what's now the Yoga Center. There's always something interesting going on there. And as my paper grew, I actually had 40 newspapers from around the country, major papers, Chicago Sun-Times, New York Times, Boston Globe. They would subscribe to my little paper, and I'd always say, why? And they said, well, this is what newspapers started out to be, grassroots, putting down your thoughts, really standing behind them, fighting for good causes. And there's more going on in your little city than there is in Chicago. We're still not ready for you. So what happened was I was writing about people, and think about Marlborough, or a town, I don't know, 30,000, did we figure out how big it is yet? Yeah. So, Newburyport's about half that. And it feels like a small southern town. And it seems like everyone knew everyone. And I didn't know how to write a newspaper, so I modeled myself after Molly Ivins down in Texas, or Carl Hyacin in Florida, or Mike Marnicle before he fell from grace. But the difference was they would write about people that you didn't know about. You may have heard of them, but you didn't know who they were. They weren't your neighbors. They weren't your co-workers. They weren't your husband. And I was writing some very interesting things about people everybody knew about. David Hall, one of my friends who's a big property owner in Newburyport, refers to The Undertow's 11 years of existence as a great sociological experiment. Not everyone thought of it that way. Have a seat, okay? Thank you. The people we wrote about hated it, of course, as you would too. But then they would sometimes be surprised when I'd rake someone over the coals for lying at a city council meeting, but praise them for taking a good stand in the next meeting. The one group I didn't go after was the Newburyport Police Department, because I was afraid of them. I was told to be afraid of them. And then it just got to be too much. At one point, it was the only bullies I didn't go after. People kept saying, you have to write about them. No one else would take them on. Mayors were afraid of them. City councilors didn't go near them. And so I decided I'd heard enough about pit bull fighting and cockfighting. And like I said to the cops, I don't care if you cheat on your wife, but I do care if you're supposed to be directing traffic and you're cheating on your wife. So there was a fine line of what was acceptable, what wasn't. But when I went after the cops, it was like whacking a hornet's nest with a baseball bat. And they were upset. And at the time, we didn't have the most ethical police department or chief. And so they started coming after me. And other people did too. I didn't know where everything came from, but my ties would be slashed. They were slashed so many times. Advertisers were threatened. A police report came out. An independent study came and they talked to businesses saying that the police department would not support you if you were robbed or if you called for something because you advertised in the undertow. It got crazy. My windshield was smashed. I never went to the police. And then the death threats started. All those, like those tacky little movies with the letters cut up and pasted in. And someone said, why didn't you go to the police about it? And I said, well, I was afraid the police were the ones who were doing it. And they said, well, why would you think that? I said the words were misspelled. But we had good police officers too, and they were the ones giving me information about the guys who weren't good. I would be warned from the good police officers, be careful, don't talk at the time, and before cell phones as much. A cordless phone, don't talk on your cordless phone because they're outside listening with devices they can pick that up with. And I was fine with all that until one night my trash went missing. And I didn't think anything of it at first because it was Newburyport, but it was the first time in years I'd ever put my trash out the night before collection came. And as fate would have it, I came back and it was missing. And I told a friend of mine who was a police officer, and he thought it was funny. But the next night I was in City Hall watching a meeting going on. He said, psst, come out in the hallway. He said, stand outside about 9:30 between City Hall and the police department in the back alley and wait at the dumpster. And there 2 of our police inspectors came out with my trash. They were looking for anything that they could get on me because they really didn't have anything. As I write in the book, I was a big guy like I am now, albeit a boring one. And they were hoping to find drug paraphernalia or child pornography, a list of sources that would lead them to people in the department who were blowing the whistle on them. But all they found were Ben & Jerry containers and Big Mac wrappers. But that was enough to push me over the edge. For some reason, I just felt really, that was the one thing that did it, even worse than the death threats. I'm not sure why. It's something having to do with the people who are supposed to protect you were now going through my trash trying to find anything they could on me. And about that time, I was sleeping. I was a nervous wreck. I had some New York Times reporters who were retired, who lived in town, who gave me guidance and would always warn me of things. As a matter of fact, these 70 and 80-year-old men would drive around at night with me at 2 in the morning delivering my paper, making sure I wasn't arrested so that I would have a witness. And they warned me that at any time, walking down the street, someone could arrest you for any trumped-up charge. Now, that did happen one time. It's not in the book, and it will be in the next one. At 5 o'clock on a Friday night, just after the banks closed and the court closed, we were arrested. Tom Ryan and Atticus M. Finch. For intimidation of a witness. It was intimidating my own witness in a case, which is really interesting. And they hoped I'd have to stay in jail all weekend long. And I would not be able to make bail because the banks had closed and the court had closed at that time. But luckily, someone at the court found out about it and forced them to release us. And when we went before the judge a few weeks later for the trial, it was really funny. The DA was there and some of the dirty cops who were there. And she kept reading the report about Mr. Ryan and Mr. Finch were apprehended at 5:05, and at that time they were walking up State Street, and at 5:07 they turned left on State Street, on Charter Street, and a cruiser pulled in, we surrounded them, and we apprehended them. And they had to bring a judge in from the outside to hear the case because the previous judge, I had reported about a month before about him receiving free paving material from the city to find in their favor in a case. So I promised, I always told him after that I'd never use Judge Welch's name. And I used to respect him. He was William Lloyd Marquand's grandson. He still is his grandson. Anyways, and I think he has relatives in this town, so I hope you're watching. No, I'm kidding. So the judge said, I keep hearing about Mr. Ryan. I see Mr. Ryan. Where's this Mr. Finch? And she was looking around the courtroom, and the DA was sitting there, and she said, well, Mr. Finch couldn't be here today. He's like, well, he's mentioned in the case. He was arrested. He was in the police report. I'm seeing it right in front of me. You're talking about, you're reading it. And the detective said he couldn't be here. And the judge was not intimidated by this detective like the other judge was. He said, I don't care who you are. Where's Mr. Finch? And so my attorney said, I think my client can answer that. And he said, Mr. Ryan, where's Mr. Finch? I said, he's on his dog bed back home. And he said, he's a dog? I said, well, yeah. And David Foley, our police inspector, who was the dirtiest of all, said, but he's with them anywhere. They're like co-conspirators. They never go anywhere without each other. I had to go, before the court case, I had to go get my police record. And I'll tell you, I was scared stiff of the police. I really was. But I learned with bullies, you can't back down from them. You can't show them you're afraid. So one day, just before, I went and got one of those horrible tacky costumes they get for dogs. And Atticus never wears anything except for his bodysuit and his boots. And I got him a costume that looked like a jailbird. And we walked into the police department and got my report. And sometimes the best way to deal with a bully is by tweaking them and looking them in the eye. Matter of fact, the week after they went and took my trash, one of the city councilors was very young and stupid, but honest and brave, brought me to the annual police ball as his date. So I always thought it was important, no matter how afraid I was, and I was frightened quite often, to stand up to these guys. But anyways, that's what was happening in my life, and things were crazy when they stole my trash. And I got an email from a member of the Zoning Board of Appeals, Nancy Noyes. She sent out a big email, and she was big into rescuing animals, and she had so many she couldn't take anymore. And she said, we have this neglected miniature schnauzer named Max. We're trying to find him a home. He's been in a cellar for the better part of 11 years. And we've pretty much taken him from the owner. But if we don't find a home, he's going to go in a shelter. And at his age and his temperament, he'll be put down. Now, I never had any money, so I could never donate to causes. So I'd always put free ads in the paper. And so that's what I was determined to do. Hi again. Good. Thanks for coming, Laura. And so what happened was, instead of typing, I'll put an ad in, I said, I'll take him. And I said, what did I do? Schnauzers are horrible. They bark too much, they're hyperactive. And I said, who would want a Schnauzer? And I can't believe I did this. So I hoped someone else would claim. But the next email I received from her said, congratulations, you guys will be very happy together. Well, Max came into my life and he was a mess. I couldn't leave him alone. He would bark nonstop because of the neglect he had. So I left him in my apartment. So I got one of those citronella collars. But it just shows that dogs are smarter than people. I put it on him. You know, when you bark, it sprays and it gets him to stop. So, but he'd learn to go oof, oof, until it was all gone, and then he'd start. So then I got him the shock collar. But that one didn't work. And he barked and it shocked him, so it barked him again. Shocked him again. And then he'd bark again, so it'd shock him again. So this won't work. So I got him the one with the beep, and that worked. It didn't take long for Max and I to bond. And before long, he was walking leashless. And like Atticus, he and I went everywhere. We went to inaugurations together in the city, the mayor's office, different businesses around town. And people started to call him by his full name now, because I extended his name for our other muckraking journalists, Garrison and Gillis. So he became Maxwell Garrison Gillis. And everywhere we went in town, people would say hello to him and greet him by name. And I didn't know anything about raising a dog or rescuing a dog, so I said, how would I want to be treated? So that's all I did. But unfortunately, in a year and a half I had him, he went downhill real quick at the end, and he started having seizures. And I brought him to my vet, Dr. Grillo, and Dr. Grillo said, he's old. I said, is there anything we do? He said, no, he's old. And the end would come quickly. I just wasn't ready for how quickly it would come. Actually, the next day we put him down. But before we did, 2 restaurants in town opened their doors for him and had a bit of a party for him. And then that night before we put him down, we went to Cafe de Siena and sat outside. And more than 100 people came by who knew about it and came by to pay their respects. Politicians, business owners, just regular people. Some clean cops being watched by the dirty cops in the corner. And then we ended our night by sitting at the foot of the statue of William Lloyd Garrison, one of my heroes there. And I brought him home, and the next morning I brought him around town, and he seemed great. And I thought maybe he's going to be fine, but he wasn't. The seizure started, so I brought him around to say goodbye to all his friends. And we took one last drive around, and I brought him to the vet, and Dr. Grillo injected him twice. My mother died when I was 7. I've had friends die throughout my life, but nothing floored me like losing this first real dog I had. And I know those of you who can relate to it, wiping your eyes now, know what that's like. It's the worst feeling in the world. And this guy, this tough guy who drove around town with a baseball bat in my back seat to use in case someone came after me, I couldn't leave my apartment. I was crying too much. I still get teary-eyed. But I stayed in my apartment for a couple of days. But when I came out at night so no one would see me. And I walked down State Street, and all these great shops, these boutiques in Newburyport, all had signs. Most of them had signs in the window saying, goodbye, Maxwell Garrison Gillis, or Newburyport lost a good dog today. And this dog who no one wanted had ended up with this great celebrity life in the end. Letters came in nonstop. And it was just really moving, because I wrote about him in my paper a little bit, my letters home to my dad. It's a regular column. And I thought, this is really amazing. But I knew I couldn't get another dog. But my friends kept seeing me trip over Max's chew toys and cry. So they took up a collection, gave me $1,000 and said, find another one. But first I tried to get a rescue. And I couldn't find one. And finally I found a brother and sister down in the Mid-Atlantic states. No one wanted them because they had to come together, so I said, I'll take both. And they were thrilled. So we worked everything out. I did the interview over the phone. They said, you can have them, and we'll meet halfway, and of course you have to pay the adoption fee. And at the end of this whole process, I said to her on the phone, they're going to love Newburyport. We have the beaches, we have the woods, and they'll get to run off leash like Max did. And she said, you would let our dogs off leash? And I said, well, if they behaved, I would. Why would I keep them on them? And they said, you don't deserve a dog. And she hung up on us. So that's when my friends chipped in for the money, and I went online looking for dogs and found a bunch of breeders who responded to me. But there was one who was very persistent. She kept sending tons of pictures, these micro-miniature schnauzers. They only get to be 5 pounds. I said, God, I'm afraid I'll crush them. And then she sent other pictures, and I was like, no, this is not right. And they all look too perfect, you know, perfectly posed if you've ever gone looking at a breeder's website. And they're on their satin pillows. And I said, that's not, and she said, well, what are you looking for? And I said, well, I'm looking for not a look, but a feel. And I explained to her over the phone, with her strong Southern accent, what Max meant to my life. And she said, after a while, she said, well, I have one other dog. He's a little different. And I was going to keep him for myself, and I thought he was damaged in some way. And so she sent me a picture. And what she sent me, instead of all the perfectly posed dogs, he was posed like this, like he didn't care. And immediately I said something about him I like. He didn't care about the camera, so I said, I'll take him. I wouldn't know it for 7 years that I broke her heart. She was an abused woman, a neglected woman herself, a lot like Max, had been neglected, but worse. She had been raped several times over throughout her life, a really horrible situation through marriages. Abused children often turn up in abused relationships because that's all they know. I didn't know any of this at the time. But he was the only one that made her happy. She had bred more than 1,000 dogs, and she's, are you yawning? I'll speed it up. And so I'd later find out that it was the only dog she didn't want to give up of more than 1,000 she bred. And she sat in her truck and cried for 2 hours the day she sent him up to us. And she would keep track of him for years. And I didn't know why exactly. But she was our guiding point. And she said, carry him everywhere you go in the beginning. And it would create a great bond. And it does, so you won't need a leash or a collar. So Atticus came into my life, guided by Paige Foster, the breeder. And I started taking better care of myself. I started walking more. I started watching what I ate better. And so Atticus and I became active the first 3 years of life. And then one of my brothers was climbing a mountain in New Hampshire. Actually, 3 of my brothers were, and they invited us up. And we decided to go. I decided to go, and Atticus came along. Now, 4 middle-aged Irish Catholic, out-of-shape men with nothing to say to each other on a mountain, it's not a pretty sight. There was a lot of swearing at mosquitoes, and how much farther? We were like 3-year-olds. But only one of us had a good time, and only one of us did well. But seeing him sitting on the mountaintop, looking off the top of Mount Garfield, if you've ever been there, it has an incredible view. It's this beautiful amphitheater feel. You drop off into the Pemigewasset wilderness, and on your right and left and off in the distance are these great mountains. There's nothing behind you. But when we were all there gasping for air, Atticus was sitting, not moving anything, and there's plenty of pictures on my website and Facebook if you've been on there, you see him. And the hiking community who've seen these pictures start referring to him as little Buddha. So he looks like a little Buddha just sitting there, not moving anything but his head. And he'll sit there for 40 minutes, for an hour, for 30 minutes. And every mountain's the same if the weather's good. For me, I saw those mountains and the views, and I couldn't believe something so beautiful existed so close to Newburyport, a place I was writing about so many dark things about. So all winter long, I thought about that hike we had done, because it took place in September. And the next summer, Atticus and I went up to see how many 4,000 footers we could climb. In 11 weeks, we climbed all 48 of them. The next winter, we went back to replicate that feat, to attempt to replicate it. And people said, what are you, stupid? middle-aged, overweight, out-of-shape newspaper editors with a paralyzing fear of heights, and little dogs don't belong in the mountains, especially in winter. And only one dog had ever done them in winter. He's a Newfoundland, 160 pounds. So I had to go to EMS and get equipped for everything. And it cost me several $1,000s. And I always laughed that the people in EMS said, "What do you want to do?" And they'd look at Atticus and look at me, and I told them I wanted to hike all 48 in one winter. And they'd always say, "You know, people die up there." And then they said, "You need one of these too, and one of these, and one of these." And I always say they sold me as much as they could because they knew I wouldn't be a return customer. The first day we did a winter hike was on Mount Tecumseh, and I got there at 1:35 when winter started. It was the winter solstice. And I said, "We're going to get going." And 40 minutes later, I finally finished putting my equipment on, and I was like, "God, this sucks." It was harder than climbing the mountain. But as I like to say, I had it easy compared to Atticus. Now, Atticus always wore, and so did Max, mutlucks, the little boots. And it's sort of funny. They stopped making these boots, by the way. I call them the Wicked Witch of the East boots, because they should be sticking out from underneath some house. And we probably bought the last pair that was available because no one really wanted them, so they discontinued them. But we wore them in town for the salt on the sidewalk, so they'd burn their pads. And so we had boots to wear in the winter, but we needed a bodysuit. And I wasn't sure where I'd find one, but I found one right down the street, so I'll read to you about that. The first time I put the suit on him, we were in the store, and immediately he looked like he'd been to a taxidermist. He stood stiff as a freshly stuffed dog. He wouldn't move his head. He wouldn't even move his eyes. He's embarrassed. I'm sorry. And he stood like this for a couple of minutes in the middle of the store. Nothing I could do would get him to budge. I knelt next to him, gave him the tiniest of nudges, hoping this would throw off his balance and cause him to move a leg for support. Nothing. So I did it again. Nothing. I did it again, a little firmer this time, and still nothing. And I did it a little firmer yet, and this time, instead of moving his legs to keep his balance, he toppled over onto his side. A dead, stuffed dog with stiff legs. And he's humiliated. Look at him. The cause of death was humiliation, and rigor mortis was immediate. I rolled him gently onto his back, and he looked like a table turned upside down with his stiff legs. Okay, so I got the hint, but he still needed a bodysuit if we were going to hike in the winter. So I picked him up and set him on his feet and tried to coax him with words and then treats. I walked out of the store knowing he would go with me, but for the first time ever, he didn't go someplace with me. There was no budging him. His inner terrier had emerged, and he was determined to let his stubbornness win out. In the midst of all this drama, 3 middle-aged women in town for the day to visit the different boutiques came charging into the store. They were in the zone, deep in their shopping trance, and didn't really care who or what was in their way as they barged through the tiny shop. To make sure they didn't step on my diminutive friend, I picked him up and sat him in the crook of my arm as I always do and stood off to the side. Every now and then, one of the women would call out to the other two to look at this or that, and they'd all scurry together to examine some newfound treasure they just had to have. Then one of them stumbled upon my little friend looking like he was wearing an X-rated Aquaman suit. Sitting stiff-legged on my arm with only his head, his paws, and his privates revealed for all the world to see. And she called out to the others, "Oh my God, look at this cute little dog in his suit." And they all flocked around us. The loudest and boldest of the three, the alpha shopper, took one look and said, "My God, look at how big his penis is." Being raised Irish Catholic and having never had a woman say that to me. Is your church group really here? Sorry. I said, "Thank you." She said I was talking about the dog. Eventually, we cured the problem by bringing him to the woods. After several days of standing in my apartment as like I think of a Cosmo Kramer and Seinfeld, the coffee table book, that's a coffee table. Well, Atticus was that book. He was stiff as can be, and I brought him into the woods, and finally I pointed out a squirrel, and he chased after him. And then only after he treated him that he looked back and he realized he'd been found out. And I never pretend to know what Atticus is thinking or saying. Everyone says, "Does Atticus have a voice in the book?" And I said, "No, it'd be presumptuous of me to say what he's thinking." But this one time I can tell you, he said, "Oh, shit." So that winter, we did not finish all 48 peaks, but we got a taste for it. We finished 41 peaks. So in a summer and a winter, our first year of hiking, we did 89 peaks. And we went back the next summer, did all 48 again. And by this point, a friend of mine in the school committee died of cancer. And the only reason she ran was because of the articles I wrote in the Undertowed. And she ran on the motto for the kids. And she made me promise on her deathbed with Atticus by my side that we would give her eulogy. And she gave a list of things for me to do for her after she died. I never got to do the last one. I did every other one for her. And her friends were funny because she was socially connected. And they all said, why did she call you? And I thought, I don't know. Well, what did she tell you? I'm not allowed to say, but something was about you. At the last second, just before we were supposed to go to the church, someone in her family or friends in the group changed her plans on her after she died. And they decided it was inappropriate for a muckraking journalist with a little dog to give her eulogy. So they had a very spiffy bank president give it. Now, he didn't know this story until he showed up in my new report reading. So he bought 4 books to make it up for me. Atticus and I skipped the funeral. I think Vicki would have liked that. But I thought about it all summer long, what we could do to make it up for her. And every August, if you listen to Sports Radio WEI, they have this great thing with Nesson, which is a fundraiser for the Jimmy Fund. And they talk, these 3-year-old kids go on the air and they talk about fighting cancer, and you say, man, I don't have the courage to, do this or that, and they're talking about it like it's just natural for them. And then there's parents talking about losing 3-year-old kids. And they're talking with such courage. And I was just sobbing in the car. And we're driving up through Plymouth, New Hampshire, and I look up and I see the mountains off in the distance. And I thought of Vicki, and I thought of for the kids, and I said, well, I know what we'll do. We'll try to do something no man and dog had ever done. We'll try to hike all 48 of the 4,000 footers twice in the 90 days of winter, so 96 peaks in 90 days. And the guys at EMS said, you'll really die now. I'm going to skip ahead a bit. Some of this has been on Animal Planet every week. It seems they play it, which is good for us, but at the end of winter, raising thousands of dollars for the Jimmy Fund, 3 weeks after Atticus was blind. I tossed a cookie to him and he couldn't see it. And I called Dr. Grillo right away, and I was positive I had caused the blindness because of the sun beating off the snow above tree line in the northern presidentials on Franconia Ridge. And I was devastated. And Dr. Grillo, and then later a specialist, said, no, dogs don't get cataracts that quickly. Look at sled dogs, for instance. That doesn't happen to them. It wasn't your fault. Most likely Atticus was blind leading you over those mountains. And if you look at the book cover, if you have it, everyone always says that they touch up his eyes. And no, this is our first winter hike we ever went on. And no one knew it at the time, including myself, but that's when the cataracts were forming. So they were like, for a year and a half, they were there. And it's so funny because I can read him so well when he's thirsty, when he's tired, anything. But I never knew he couldn't see. And here he was leading me over 81 mountains. I think it was over 400 miles in the winter. But then something worse happened. A blood test showed that the little dog who raised thousands to fight cancer now had it. He had something called hyperthyroidism. In dogs, it equates to thyroid cancer. It's a very rare disease for dogs. And so we sent back for another round of tests, and they had it, and the same results. So I brought him to Angel Animal Medical Center, and I said, what's the chance this is the fluke? And she said, none. We have a great vet there. And she said, there's no chance with 2 tests. And so we sent off the results, sent off the test, waiting for the results. It was going to be a long time to wait, a week or so, and it seemed like forever. But at the time, little Buddha was being written about in my paper, and on my blog at the time. And there was a group of Tibetan monks. One of them is very close to the Dalai Lama. His name is Geshe Gendon. He came to Newburyport. He comes every 2 years to build a sand mandala. And he was reading the Undertowed in his robes and everything while the others were making the sand. And he said, I want to meet this little Buddha. And so the Buddhist monk and little Buddha sat together, and he prayed for him. And I remember Maureen Carroll's vet tech calling me up for Angel, saying the test came in, and we have no idea what happened, but the cancer's gone. Call it the power of friendship or prayer or whatever. But what happened in those 3 weeks' time from the blindness came on, people who were cancer survivors, school kids, hikers, people in Newburyport, and not looking for money, but they sent in $9,000 in 3 weeks' time for his eye surgery so he could see again. He had like little cataract lenses put in so he can see fine. And it gave us an idea. And as you know, when you're down in the dumps and really hurting, you'll do anything. You'll pray and you'll promise God anything. I keep trying to ignore him back then at that time, or her, or whatever it is. And I said, please, if you see Atticus through this, I'll gladly sell my newspaper and move to the mountains of New Hampshire where he's happiest. And he did, so I did. I like to tell a story. People always say, how much did you get for it? It wasn't much. It wasn't worth much. We didn't have a lot of advertisers. Most of the money came in from subscribers. So it wasn't a major newspaper. And there were only 2 bidders on it. And one of them was a group of 5 very successful businessmen who owned another paper in another part of the Merrimack Valley. And they offered more money. And the other fellow, I was just thinking, oh God, he was just a thug. I used my connection to the police department and said, what do you know about this guy? And he said, well, he's 42 years old, he's been arrested 43 times. He's not a good man, he's done this, he's done that. But I was in a quandary because the group of successful businessmen who could make my paper last stood against everything I believed. And I believe in a woman's right to choose. I'm not a Democrat, but I'm progressive, I think. I believed that, gays aren't bad people. And these guys didn't think that way. They loved George Bush's war on terror. And I think we were actually the first paper in the country that actually listed the casualties the first time it was done. That's how progressive we were. But I had no choice. They had money, and they would make sure the paper lasted, and the other guy had no hope. So I thought of my dearly departed my father, who was a great man and loved the Kennedys. And I did the only thing I could do. I followed my conscience and sold it to the derelict instead. The paper would never be published again. And the undertow died, which some people thought it should have as we left town. As I go on tour, I always find out more and more stories about what my book's about, because you're asked all the time, what's the theme behind it? You write about your father, you write about Newburyport, you write about the mountains, you write about Atticus and you and nature. But I think the theme that keeps coming back to me, that means the most to me, is selflessness. Joseph Campbell, the mythologist who was on PBS for years and still is, they keep replaying it, interviewed by Bill Moyers, talks about the power of myth. And he talks about you have to leave the life you have in order to lead the life you're supposed to lead. And when we're kids, we sit in front of the bedroom mirror or stand there and pretend we're hitting the home run to win the World Series or being elected president or getting some great award. And when you're 7 or 8 or 10, you think about all the great things that are going to happen. And nothing against anyone, nothing against myself, but that goes away, it gets chipped away through time. Life happens. You end up in a job you don't really care for. You get stressed. You end up on drugs. You beat your wife. You cheat on your wife. You make choices that aren't positive. Even if you're not bad, you do things, you sort of cheat yourself in some things. You settle for less than you should have, and you forget those dreams. And I had it made because my transformation came from writing about a city that was very dark. Even though I was doing something I loved doing, writing and making a living on it, I was writing about dark things and things people weren't doing well. But because of incredible breeder who had a horrible life, who gave up the only dog she never wanted to give up to a man who needed it more than she did, who she never met, that was one thing for me. But then to have another teacher, an Atticus, leading me over 81 mountains in one winter, going blind, or being blind. When you get those kind of teachers in your life, how can you not accept there's supposed to be lessons to be taught? The universe is out there, whatever you want to call it. They're always hinting that, you're supposed to learn here, you're supposed to learn there. And I had to pay attention. The book is interesting, and I'll stop pretty soon, and I'll take some questions. But when I wrote the book, I didn't want to write about Newburyport, and my editor made me. I didn't want to write about my family. My editor made me. Thank God. It was stuff I didn't want to revisit. I just want to write about the happy stuff. They said, we have to set a baseline for where you came from and your progress. And I wrote it. They gave me 8 months to write it, and it was fantastic timing, and I could write it so much shorter than that. But 3 weeks to go, my agent, dear Brian DeFiore, called me up and said, how's it going? I'm getting a little nervous. I said, I'm fine. I'm fine. It's finished. He said, can you send it to me? I said, I just deleted it. And he said, oh my God, you deleted it? Why'd you do that? I said, I hate it. I felt like I was writing it for HarperCollins and not for me. And my letter home to my father was a popular column in my paper, and I'd actually write him a letter. So I decided I wanted to tell our story in an innocent way without worrying what anyone thought about me crying or laughing or feeling guilty or sad. And so I wrote it to a safe audience. I pretended I was married and had children, and I pretended my children had children. So each chapter was written as an individual letter to a grandchild. And I'd actually write it that way, dear so-and-so, and then I'd write it, and I finished in 3 weeks' time. And then we polished it up afterwards. The other wonderful thing about the book is Paige Foster hated this term. She's the breeder. But Paige hated being called a psychic. But she is very psychic, very intuitive, she prefers. And she'd have these incredible dreams. And when we put out the book to bid, my agent, who is great reputation, sent it out to a bunch of publishing house, and he said, it's going to take weeks, months, maybe a year before we've heard anything. And you might have to repackage it because no one will want it. And I said, no, I think we'll get some responses within the week. He said, how would you know? I said, well, Ruthie had a dream. I mean, Paige had a dream. And he's like, what do you mean she had a dream? I said, well, she sees things. And within 4 days, we had 4 contract offers, 4 bidding on it. And someone offered us, a Penguin offered us a couple $100,000 or preempt saying, take this, please take this. And don't put it up to bid and we'll give it to you. And I said, well, if they're willing to offer that now, they'll be willing to offer it later, so let's just go roll the die or something. And he said no, because we had another very popular author with us who did the same thing and they didn't get half as much because the bidding process didn't get up that high. So I said, let me talk to Paige Foster because she always has these wonderful dreams. So I did, and Paige said, nah, I wouldn't take it. I said, why? And she said, I keep seeing 450 in my head. I said, 450,000? In this bad economy, a no-name writer? And she said, yep, I just believe it. So she never steered me wrong with Atticus. And then any time she made a prediction, I would follow through. So I said to Brian, okay, Paige had a dream, we're going to turn it down. And I could have sworn I heard him doing this on the desk. This is the former editor-in-chief of Random House in Hyperion, a Disney division, their publishing division. And he said, okay, I'll let them know. So Monday came, the results came in, and he was thrilled. And I'm told not to talk about money, but it was in all the trade journals. You can still see it online. HarperCollins won the bidding at $275,000, and Brian was thrilled. In a bad economy, he said a couple of years ago that would have been 700-something thousand. And I never had money, so I didn't care about the money. But he said, you sound depressed. I said, I am. It's the first time she was ever wrong. And he's like, well, you really can't count on those kind of people in business like this. But within 3 weeks' time or 2 weeks' time, Italy, Germany, and UK all offered us foreign contracts, and our total came up to $460,000. And Brian said, wow, she was right. Does she have any other, does she know anything else? I said, well, do you know how I picked her, how I picked you out? Because I had another agent I fired, which is unheard of for an unknown author. You can't do that because agents are harder to find than publishers. And as Honor DeBuse once told me, for every 50 query letters you send out, expect at least 49 rejections. You send out a query letter and they say yes, and you send your proposal, and then you get rejected again. But I sent out 15 and received 12 offers for representation. But I hated the person I was with. But she was a reputable firm, and I couldn't get rid of her until one time Paige said, I had a dream. You're not supposed to be with her, you're supposed to be with some guy. I don't know who it is. And she didn't know anything about publishing. All I know is you walk in his house, and the walls are all white, and you walk by it, and these Disney characters, like holograms, come to life. There's Goofy, and there's Minnie, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to tell this. I don't know what this means. She goes, neither do I. I think it has something to do with someone who used to be involved with Disney, but not directly. So I'm like, ugh. So I'm going through the book, and the guide to literary agents comes out every year. It's like a dictionary. It's this big, and I'm like, okay. And so it turns out Hyperion Publishing, and that was Brian DeFiore, who now is an agent, but he used to be with them. And so when he was saying about Ruth, when he was saying that she got the number right, he said, does she know everything else? I said, well, this is how I chose you. And he said, well, does she know anything else? I said, yeah, that you should listen to her from now on. I'll stop there. I just want to say thank you for coming out. It's been an incredible experience. We spent the last 6 months on the New England Northeast bestseller list. We haven't got the national publicity we're hoping for yet, but we continue to grow sales every week, it seems, and it's word of mouth. It's because of people like yourself who read it and pass it on. Amazon can sell a book, but they can't grow a book, and that's why we love our independent bookstores. In North Conway, we have a wonderful one, and they were struggling with business. There's an article about to be published in the Concord paper up there. They were getting ready to go out of business this last year, and their landlord forgave them for several months' rent and said, just take it up from here. And they said, we don't know how we'll make it. So I made a deal that I would only, where we didn't go on tour, we would sign only with them and we'd give the autograph. And so they got sales from around the country coming in and around the world. And for the first time ever, the most they ever done on a launch for a book is 125, where our friend Lisa Gardner lives right down the street. But for our launch, they sold 450 books, which was great for them. And locals started coming in who had never been there before and started buying other books. Now to date, I think they're up to 1,600 books they've sold in 6 months for an independent bookstore. And now they've had the best year they've ever had. And we're really fortunate to have independent bookstores, and I always plug them. I know we need Amazon to make money, to sell them, but I never buy from Amazon if I can help it. I'll always use independent, and I want to give them a plug. And independent people who get locals to talk about it, and it creates a sort of a walking book club, and we're very fortunate to have them behind us and to have what my editor calls an organic growth. They would keep growing and growing and growing, and every week on the New England list I keep checking, and there's 1 week Bill Clinton is there, and the next week he's gone. Tina Fey is there, and then she's gone. Bill Riley's there, and then he's there again, then he's gone, thankfully. But we continue to be there for 6 straight months. And it's funny, there's these little dots next to them, and it says, this is the only paper, this is the only book that's not getting the national attention. Everyone else gets, the Boston Globe didn't really write about us either. And so it's all word of mouth, and it's been fantastic for us. So I want to thank the people who have read it and talked about it and passed it on and bought it for gifts as others. And if you haven't done that yet, they're selling a bunch over there.
Tom, the Friends of the Marlborough Public Library do hereby present this certificate of appreciation to Tom Ryan and Atticus, author of Following Atticus, for appearing as guest speaker at the Friends of the Marlborough Public Library's 2012 McConnell Author Celebrity Series, Wednesday, February 15th, signed by myself and Alice.
Oh, thank you very much.